to read you something from a couple of different books, as well as the Bible. And several things I wanted to put on the board this morning if we get a chance, but I want to read something. This book was written somewhere in the late 1800s by Thomas H. Burgo, and I've actually read from this book many years ago, probably 8, 10, 12 years ago, and done some teaching from this particular book. It's 2 volumes. This is volume 1 and volume 2. But it's called The Science of the Soul and the Stars. And if I were to try to describe God, I run into all kinds of hurdles to try to do that. And the reason I do run into hurdles is because of preconceived notions and ideas. And so to talk about God is vaguely impossible, because if you have 100 people, 1,000 people, or 100,000 people, you have that many different ideas of God. What is God? What? And there's so many different synonyms that people have put in there to talk about God. I was actually talking to a guy yesterday, and he's a, quote, evangelical, and we're trying to talk to him about Genesis 1, and he was asking me some questions, and we were just kind of in a dialogue, and come to find out he used to date Bible, and he found out that I knew Dake, and that I was given a Dake Bible by Dake. He couldn't believe that. He said, do you embrace all of his notes and his ideas? And I said, no, I don't. I said, actually, I just take it exactly opposite. And so when I see his notes, they say one thing, I usually look the other way and see a different thing. And well, that was like a red flag waving. And so he kind of got a little skittish. And then I said another thing to him. I said, well, if we go back and we really study the old Hebrew and try to get the concepts that it was giving us, I said, then we come up with a different story. And I said, really, it's not a different story, but it's a story that has depth to it instead of just surface. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? I said, well, if you look at Genesis 1, the Hebrew word Elohim, I said, you've heard of that, haven't you? Yeah. I said, well, if you look at that word in Hebrew, it's plural. I said, it actually means gods with an S on the end of it. And boy, then that one is another big rip. What do you mean, gods? Too many gods. But yet, if we look at all ancient material, that's how they understood this term we call gods. It would have been put in different terminology. Different words would have been used. Like in Hebrew, you would have said Elohim. Well, if you understood Hebrew, you would have understood that meant the gods. And if you said the gods, then you'd have to have a big old question mark. What do you mean the gods? You mean there are more than one? Yeah, maybe 12, maybe 24, maybe 1 million. Who knows? But there are different facets of energy. So anyway, this book that I'll read from Thomas H. Burgo, it's called The Science of the Soul and the Stars. He has some very provoking ideas and concepts. So, if you want to read something that's very provoking, it's a good read. Two books, Volume 1 and Volume 2. But to say the things that I say, I know that I run into all kinds of hurdles if it falls on religious ears. And I do know that it's so difficult to communicate many times what I would like to say because of the lack of words on my part, and trying to find the right words to say a certain thing sometimes is difficult because it can be heard and taken not necessarily in a way that I don't mean it, but in a wrong way. And so anyway, let me just read this. This is being uncreated, eternal, alone. But that's a mouthful. Being uncreated, eternal, alone. Now just think about that. You see, if we left God, or whatever name we want, source, energy, whatever, if we left it as it is, it would be alone. In other words, it's called, in Hindu and Buddhist material, it's called nothingness. Simply because, basically, in the nothingness or no thingness of it, or timelessness. If I said timelessness, I say eternal. What is eternal? Eternal just simply means without time. So if that's how you left it, and that's all it was, and if we wanted to just go to heaven, then that's what we would be going to. Nothingness. Heaven in the mindset of religion. I know that's hard to think. I realize that's hard to think. But I want to read that to you again. This is a quote from someone. Being uncreated. Now think about that. Without you, without material, whatever the material might be, that's what God is. Uncreated. So there's nothing. You think about that. So that means God is eternal. So He's without time. So if you're without time, then you're without materiality. And you have to think about it. Last week I talked about, you being the eye that God sees a sunset through. God can't see that sunset if God is just eternal, timeless. How could it see it? It has no idea what it is. So again, that's why we come back to this word, servant. The ayin, that's the Hebrew, 70. Ayin is the eye of God. Well, that's who you are. If we can come to grasp that and begin to embrace that, begin to realize that, we can understand we're the apple of the eye of God. We can understand that we are in a love relationship with God. But anyway, I'll read this again. Being uncreated, eternal, and alone. Says Dr. John Young, when speaking of the Creator and the creation. And certainly no inspired writer ever penned a more sublime truth than is contained in these words. Okay? Pure spirit, per se, is diffused, non-atomic. Pure spirit. If it's non-atomic, if it doesn't have an atom in it, it doesn't have creation. Because that's the first step of creation, is atom, which is the same word as Adam. Pure spirit, per se, is diffused, non-atomic, uncreated, formless, self-existent being. It's silent, it's motionless, it's unconscious divinity, possessing in its sublime purity the one sole deific attribute expressible in human language as absolute and unconditioned potentiality. Absolute and unconditioned potentiality. It's potential, but that's as far as it goes. You have to be the recipient of that. You have to be that which brings that into being. Now, I'm going to read this a little more. Such is the realm of spirit, which for the sake of linguistic convenience has been termed by the occultist. The word occultist would probably, I think, would communicate better because it's taken, for the last 100 years, it's taken a bad route. And religion looks at it as though they would associate the word occult or cult with demons or devils or stuff like that, when actually the word just simply means secret or hidden. And it's all through the scriptures. So God is the real occult mystery. So God is the one that's the secret, hidden wisdom. And that's what the word occult just simply means. It's secret. So for me, I always try to change this word, been termed by the secretist, or those who understand the secrets of God. You know, Psalms 91, God will take you into the secret place. That's the occult place right there. Okay, let me read that again. Such is the realm of spirit, which for the sake of linguistic convenience has been termed by the occultists the realm of unmanifest being. With this emanation of this inconceivable state, we now have to deal. The Kabbalah contains long and elaborate treatises upon the various emanations of the 10 Sephiroth, which for the most part are written in such an allegorical style as to be practically useless to most Western students. Do you know why that? When they use Western students, they're talking about Europe, Spain, Italy, Rome, and America.
They're talking mostly about Caucasians and then what we have brought.
Exactly.
When they're talking Western, they're not talking about the Native Americans. They're not talking about the Incas and the...
No.
They're talking about our Caucasian culture.
Exactly. Most European, Spanish, Rome, that's when you talk about that, you're looking at the continent of Europe as East and West. When you read all ancient writers, when we talk about Western, that's exactly what they're referring to, European or Caucasian, what we would call white-skinned people. And this is where we have so much gross error, where we got way off the track of what truth has always been. But that's difficult for the Caucasian ear to hear. You know, it really is. So, and to understand these terminologies, because these terminologies come out of spiritual language and not out of literalist historical language. And it's such a vast difference. And I told this fellow yesterday, I said, if you read Scripture as a history book, you'll never get the mystery of the book. And you know, he kind of, huh? What did you mean when you said that? I said, you'll never get the real depth of the meaning of the word. That's all. If all you do is just read it, that's surface level. Because it's written as an allegory and laid over what seems to be a history, when it's not really a history, it's a mystery that's talking about the depth of your being. And you have to grasp and realize that if I am, according to Genesis 1:26, created as the image of God, then ever what God is, I am, and can't not be. I have to be that, because that's how God made me. So therefore, all of that potentiality that God is referring to, that writers are talking about, has to be in the depth of my being. It has to be something that is a deposit in me. And I want to just say this to us. It comes up out of me when I extract it. When I draw down in the depth of my being from the well of my being and bring up buckets of living water. Do you understand that? That's something that we have to do. We implement that. And as we do that, guess what we do? We manifest what God is. And I'm picking on some words this morning that I wanted to talk about. And if you have never read Dr. Hawkins' Power versus Force, you have to read it. You just have to read it. To me, it is a book that should be required reading for any seminary student or anybody who wants to go deeper into spiritual truth should have to read that book, Power versus Force. And so it's written, Dr. Hawkins, from an academic level, he begins to use kinesiology, muscle testing, to prove different concepts and different truths of spiritual. And he says that you have to get to the level of 200, which he has a chart to measure spirituality, like Buddha measures at 600, Jesus measures at 700, etc. And all religion, this is such a simple but profound, phenomenal truth, all religion measures under 150. And what you find below 150 is you find shame, blame, fear. Those are very slow, low, weighty energies and vibrations. And yet those are the very tools used by all religions to try to con and manipulate and deceive people. And the way they do that, they do it by the use of words, And they do it by the misuse of words. And so that's why I say it should be mandatory reading for every seminary student to have to read that, and you can get to understand it. Because when you come to the level of 200, 200 calibrates as courage. And I tell you, it takes courage to face yourself and to step out from an arena, especially if your mama and your grandmama and your great-great-grandmama have all been in that circle of religion, and you're stepping out of that. Like in my case, when I did that, you know, you're already going to hell. You've already crossed the line when you do that. But it takes courage to do that, because anything below that, you can stay in those low, slow energies of fear and shame and blame, and that's what we do. You do something, and then according to that religious ideology, that's wrong, bless God. And because it's wrong, you shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have drank that. You shouldn't have done that. Da, 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 da. I mean, you know, y'all remember when it was wrong to go to a movie theater, or to go to a ball game, or for girls and boys to swim in a pool together?
Yeah. Oh, couldn't go roller skating. That wasn't
Can't go roller skating.
That wasn't nothing but dancing on wheels.
Unless the boys went on Thursday night, the girls went on Friday night. Well, who in the world wants to do that?
I'll work on Sunday.
Yeah, I mean, we have all, and they're still trapped there, folks. The mass majority is still trapped there.
But man, that's what makes it so easy to keep them trapped there. That low frequency that religion itself operates at keeps the people at an even lower frequency.
Yeah.
Because you're below the superiority of the one judging you.
Yeah.
That's how they control you.
So you got to come to the place of courage. Love vibrates at 900. That's almost the highest calibration you can get. That's where love's at. Well, that's where God is. And God is love drawing us. And, you know, we can add that word that religion adds to it, unconditional love. But it's amazing to me that in religion, that love has so many conditions on it. It's crazy. If you will, if you don't, I mean, those are conditions. But according to its own definition, it's unconditional. And it truly is. And so, let me read just a little bit more here. The first emanation called by Kabbalists is the crown, means when stripped of its mystical veil simply and naked activity or motion. Thus, we see the first action of the unconscious mind is thought, and thought implies vibration or motion. Now, I want to say this in adult language in ways that we can understand it. Because God, if God is just exactly like Dr. Young says, eternal, uncreated being alone, let me say that this is Lynn. Hey, that's a hell of a lonely place to be. If you're stuck on an island by yourself, this is one of the reasons I promise you that the Catholic concept of celibacy is sick. It's something wrong with it. Simply because, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why. Any sale, and that's exactly where it all starts first, is a sale. Any sale has innate in it a longing to double or to reproduce itself or to have a partner. Period. It just works that way. Everything about your being works in that fashion. There is something that's deep inside you, God, deep inside you, longing to not be alone, but longing to be. I don't care who you are, we have that deep in us, social. We want to be,
yes.
we want to, I mean.
But yet the conundrum there, and I know you and I have talked about it, is, till you learn to be alone, to be complete alone,
Yeah.
then the rest of it doesn't can't be fulfilled anyway.
And the conundrum of that is you're really never alone because you are with your counterpart. And this is what I want you to see, because and I'm having to get into some language again, maybe adult language in some ways, in some fashions. And I use a word, and this is not a very, very common word for me, but I do understand the word, and I know that it's closely connected to a word that we would call a bad word, and that's fundicate. F-U-N. Fundicate. That's something that God is constantly doing, because fundication requires vibration. Vibration requires movement, and without movement, there's no stimulation, and stimulation brings forth ejaculation, which releases a seed. Now, again, that's some adult language. I hope people can understand that and grasp that. That's God in motion. You have to really think deeply about that. So, the first emanation, called by the Kabbalists is the crown, means when stripped of its mystical veil simply and naked activity or motion. That's what it is. It's movement. Thus we see that the first action of the unconscious mind is thought, and thought implies vibration and motion. At the moment the deific mind vibrates with thought, there springs forth from the infinite womb of divinity the duad of all future greatness. You remember last week I talked about the divine dance? That divine dance is with the spirit and matter. It's with you and with God. And that's the dance that we are all engaged in, and we are invited to that dance floor by God itself. And it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So at the moment of the deific mind vibrates with thought, these spring forth from the infinite womb of divinity, the duad of all future greatness. This duad is the Kabbalistic, Kabbalistical twins, love and wisdom, male and female. It's the two of that. It's just in everything. It's in everything. God as just love without a counterpart is just nothing. I mean, it's just nothing. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with just being nothing. I'm just saying that everything longs for the counterpart. It's like Steve's talking about. Until you learn to be alone, you can't be alone. But being alone is not just being by yourself, but it's being by the one that is yourself, which is God, which is source, which is energy, which is the very essence of your being. And in that we find peace. So he says, love and wisdom, which in turn means the attributes, attractions, repulsions are power and motion. And he doesn't use the word power. He uses the word force. And again, that's why I say everybody should be required to read power versus force. And then when you do that, everywhere you see the word force, because let me see, I wrote this down. Let's go ahead and I'm going to read you. Force can be used as a noun, and it can be used as a verb. And if you look it up in a dictionary, it's got a list of meanings. It's ridiculous. But I'm going to it can be used both as a verb or a noun. Number one meaning as a noun. It means strength, might, energy that may be exerted. And what I want to do is I really would like for us to see how we can be so deceived by just the use of a word and think, wow, that's good, that's right. For instance, the word force. If you could say that God, just like he says right here, I'll just read it again where he says, love and wisdom and crown are, in other words, one primal force containing unlimited potentialities within itself. Now that sounds good, doesn't it? What's he referring to when he says one primal force? What do you think he's referring to? Is this right? What would you think he's talking about? One primal force containing unlimited potentiality within itself. What would you think that's saying? That's simple. God. Is there anything about God that's forceful? No. Not one thing. But yet when I use that word, I'm reducing God to my level, to humans' mindset. And that's what's so deceptive over one little simple word. And I'll show you what I mean by that. And I hope you can see it. So force means strength, might, energy that may be exerted. Number 2, it means momentum, the force of a cannonball. Number 3, it means violence. Now, you cannot extract or deduct or deduce anything in God to violence. God is not violent. Religion is. God is not. And I was telling this gentleman yesterday, I said, when you go in the Old Testament, you read about God killing all these people, blah, blah, blah. He said, yeah, but I don't, that's not the way God is now. I said, why? I said, is it because you have accepted Jesus as God, and God's satisfied him so he's not mad no more? He didn't know how to answer that. So God ain't mad anymore, but he was mad in the Old Testament. And of course, you know what he said? Of course God was mad. You know why? Because man sinned. Man disobeyed him. And so, because man disobeyed him, God's mad at him, going to kill him? I said, have you not ever had children and they disobey you? Are they worthy of death? Come on. Oh. Violence. These are the meanings of this word. But yeah, I hear it constantly. I hear God put in that position where it's the force of God. Violence. And they put this as a parenthesis for this word, force. Let conquerors consider that force alone can keep what force obtained. Selah. In other words, it's just exactly like the American freedom that's given to you by force. How do you think that freedom is maintained?
By force.
By force. And by force, they will come in and take your property that you don't own if you don't comply to the articles or laws that they put in place to force you to do that.
Have to get a marriage license.
We did have all that. We did have all of that. Go back and read Emerson and Thoreau. Go back and look at what they were warning all of America. Even going to jail because they refused to pay taxes to a people. How many of you saw that post that I put on there about the American Indians? Did you see that, Steve?
Oh, yeah.
I got a lot of not argument or I got a lot of comment on that. I didn't realize that people were paying that much attention, but I got a lot of good comment on that little 30-minute YouTube clip of how I'm telling you, it made me cry. It was just ridiculous what our American government did to the Indians. It was just totally obscene.
Case after case. When we got Andrew Jackson on your $20 bill, the Cherokee were a civilized tribe, went to the Supreme Court, won their case, and Andrew Jackson told the Supreme Court, great, you made the law, but I got the army that enforces it. What are you going to do about it?
The army that enforces it.
Enforces it.
Enforces it.
And sent the Cherokee from Georgia and North Carolina to Oklahoma, where thousands and hundreds of thousands died.
Well, back during the heat of the Vietnam War that was getting all the publicity, up in North Dakota, South Dakota, land that we had given them, quote, we had given them and forced them on it, killed 100,000 of them because we found gold in the mountains and said, oops, we want that back.
Well, that's why they ran out of Georgia lands, because they found gold in the North Georgia mountains.
Yeah, that's what happened over here in Delaware.
It's exactly the same. And then when they sent them to Oklahoma, they took that away from them because they found oil.
Yeah, that's when they moved them up to, oh, you should, it's on my YouTube page. If y'all didn't see it, go on there and look at it.
That's the stuff I've studied for years.
And they put it's on YouTube, but it says we don't know how long this will be on here until they make us lift it off.
Yep.
But my goodness. Force, violence. That conquerors consider that force alone can keep what force obtained. That's what we do in war. That's what we do by war. Number 4, force. Strength for war. In other words, military forces, armed forces, air forces, etc., etc. That's used as a noun. Here's force used as a verb. This is the only way it's used in the dictionary. Okay? And yet this is applied to God in many, many marvelous books I read. And I keep thinking, well, he wrote this 150 years ago. And I thought, wow, you should have read Dr. Hawkins' book and you would have put power there. Because if you can understand the difference in force and power, force has to do with the manipulation of man and man's ability, man and woman's ability and strength to make something happen that they want to happen. Bless God, they'll force it. I don't know about you, I've been guilty of that many, many times. I'm trying to force God to my opinion, to my wants, to my this, to my that. Instead of just allowing power to be, power which is moved by love, is unlimited, total potentiality. So here is force as a verb. It means to compel, to constrain by exertion. To compel, to constrain by exertion. There's the number one meaning. It means to overpower, to press, or to push by main strength. So if you have enough strength, i.e. force, you can get something done. Number two, it means to take by violence and to ravish. Now my question would be, where can you find God in any of that? And my answer is, you cannot, because that is not what God is. That God is love. And when we can come to understand that God is love, and I go back to my triad, or my trinity, light, this is the law of God. If you want to know the eternal law of God, light produces life, which lives off the basis of love. This is exactly how the triad of God works. That is called the crown or the keter. That is from that, God produces everything. And that is love. That right there is the picture of love. That's how love works. And it's through this love that God called you and me to be His servant. And it's through this love that God called you and me to be the true Hebrew. And it's hard for you and me to think of ourselves as an Israelite or a Hebrew. It's just nearly impossible, because you're going to think of yourself as a European or an African or whatever, an Indian, etc., Hispanic. You're not going to think of yourself as these. These were ideologies that had tremendous depth. If you think of yourself as an Israel instead of a Jacob, when you are both and, but you've got to realize that God ordained and set in motion the Israel of your being to be over the Jacob of your being. Because the Jacob of your being is constantly going to manipulate and constantly going to deceive or do whatever. So anyway, let me read on here just a second, and I'll finish with this book. It said, the twins, love and wisdom, in turn mean the attributes, attraction, repulsions of force and motion. I would say of power and motion, because if I'm going to describe God in any shape, form, or fashion, if I'm going to describe God as energy moving or energy fundicating, I mean, every moment God is doing that to the earth. You can see the earth and how beautiful and vibrant and filled with life that it is. That's what it means in Genesis 1:3 when it says, and the earth was formed and void. And it got translated formed and void from tahu and bohu. And actually those words in Hebrew, tahu and bohu, actually means that it is just a pregnant power to reproduce itself. It's just full of this potentiality. Full of it. No matter how recondite or abstruse our speculations may be, when the orbit of our metaphysical meditation is complete, we will find ourselves face to face again with our original starting point, which is partly of your song that you sing. To come back to my starting point is to come back to the place where I was set here as a created being. To come back to, that's how I perceive that. I'm not talking about going back to God to nothingness. I'm coming to, but my potentiality, the greatness of my being. So he says, face to face with our original starting point, which is the infinite triad. And of course, he does the infinite triad in a little bit similar basis, but not just exactly like that. But that would be how I would perceive it, because everything comes out of light. Everything, I don't care what it is, everything comes out of light. And light doesn't necessarily mean like these bright lights in here. I'm not meaning, even though that's how you associate it, I'm talking about light as just energy. Energy. And many times that energy is in gross darkness. And that's what it tells you in Isaiah 43. That's where God hides himself, in darkness. That's where the treasures are at. But in darkness is tremendous light. Okay, face to face with our, which is the infinite triad of love. In other words, the one primal, he uses the word force, the one primal power containing unlimited potentiality within itself. See, so that's Thomas H. Bergman. That's a good book. It just goes on and on and on. And this is a writer, Paul Tice. He wrote in the 20s and 30s and 40s. He writes some really interesting stuff. He's, let's see here, where do I want to start? I want you to hear this. He says, he's talking about this word viral. Y'all heard this word viral, haven't you? V-R-I-L, viral. V-I-R. That's another word for God. It's another word for prana. It's another word for life. They use the word force, life force. I mean, you see how it's kind of, it's life power. Life's not trying to force itself. Life has the power to recreate itself. Now, there's a huge difference if you can ever see that. It's hard to see that because, we just constantly use that life force. So viral is another word. It's an old word. Actually, it goes back into Sanskrit. And so, let's see, I think y'all have heard of prana, chi, words like that. Here he starts, he says, in the original ancient language of Atlantis, see, going all the way back to Atlantis, so we may be going back 30, 40, 50,000 years. The ancient language of Atlantis tradition holding that the Atlantean root, vira, V-R-I, meaning life, is the source of the word viral, V-R-I-L. The later expressing the idea of the vital principle or the life energy. Many of these ancient occult treatises, we find frequent references to viral not only in the sense of principle of vital energy, but also in the sense of inherent usable energy which we seek to express by the term human magnetism. And I think you're going to hear a tremendous amount about magnetism now. I was listening to Dr. Bruce Lipton yesterday, and he was saying that they no longer are doing an EKG, which an EKG is an electrical current used to measure the brain waves and what's going on by putting things all over your body. You know what I'm saying? He said, they don't do that now. He said, now they have these probes that they put outside your body, and they read it by magnetism. So magnetism is now, it's not new. It's always been. That's the energy of God. Because you see, the thing about magnetism is it's constantly drawing you. It's like right now, there's never a time, people say, well, they'll come to God whenever they get under conviction. You understand what I mean? Whenever they've done enough bad and they feel bad about it enough, they'll come to God. No, God's always drawing us because God is magnetic energy. It's just a constant, always wooing, yielding, drawing you closer and closer to Him. So, he says, these ancient cults to viral not only is the sense of primal vital energy, but also in the sense of the inherent usable energy which we seek to express in terms of human magnetism. Nearly, if not all, of the schools of occult or secret doctrines in all lands and in all times have taught the existence of this wonderful principle energy. They taught that the existence of this energy is like a universal fluid. And it is. It says in the ancient teachings, the term viral is used in several senses, generally and particularly, as we will see as we proceed. In the first place, viral is held to be the great cosmic principle of very fine energy permeating all forms of matter and immanent in thought processes as well. It's immanent in your thinking. Because how I see spirit, I use spirit as like a river, just as a term, a river or a current of air, and in that river or in that current of air, all potentiality flows. Just exactly like you can see in a river, are all kinds of fishes. So in the air, there are all kinds of minerals, all kinds of particles, all kinds of things are flowing in there. Potentiality. So he says that all forms of matter, immanent in thought, possessing as well being employed by the principle of mind in its work of thinking. Viral is not identical with mind. Mind is held to be a prior manifestation of the infinite. From the mental principle arose viral and the grosser forms of energy, and then the forms of matter and fine and gross. In this original sense, viral is perceived to be a great universal principle from which proceed the multitudinous manifestations of activities. Viral in this phase of existence cannot be defined any more than any universal principle can be defined. And that's where I would agree, and that's where I would say, that's where we run into so many problems, is trying to define a word with so many synonyms. For instance, God. Can I call God viral? Yes. Can I call God source? Yes. Can I call God energy? Yes, because God is all of those things. Can I call God Lynn?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. But that's so difficult in our thinking because we have reduced ourselves to, I'm just a human. When we're not. We are the potential of what God is. If God is potential, I am potential. I am the potential of God in physical manifestation. I may think of myself in limited respects because I feel incarcerated in this physical body. If I could break free from this body like I do in my dreams, y'all know you move around in your dream, don't you? You can do this and fly, go, be. If I could really realize this body is not the limitation of my being.
The way I have heard viral is like a viral infection, or this has gone viral, for people to watch and all that kind of stuff. Something on the internet has gone viral. That's how I have heard it.
And that's how most people are familiar with it now,
Yeah.
because that's how they've taken it. When it goes back as far as Atlantis, it's an ancient, old word used even by the Egyptians, by the, gosh, I can't remember the, who was it he mentioned? See if I can find it. The Anglo-Saxons used it. The Gothics used it. The Irish used it. So there's a lot of information now saying that the Gothics, the Irish, that they're as old as the Egyptians, maybe older. They're finding a lot of information about them. But anyway, I wanted to just share that with y'all this morning because I was wanting to pick on the word power versus force, and so I looked in my concordance and I began to look at the word force. I wanted to see how it was used in Scripture, and many times the use of it in Scripture is very deceptive, but it's never used in Scripture as or with God. For instance, Jesus says in Matthew 11, he uses this phrase, he says, the violent take by force. Then I want to read you a passage of Scripture here that's common, which, gosh, I hadn't used this or read this Scripture in a lot of years. 2 Thessalonians. I can't even find it no more in my Bible. Somebody must have took it out. I'm just kidding. I don't know where it's at. I just don't use it. I just hardly ever go over here. But let me see if I can find it. Here we go. Y'all will be real familiar with this. You just hadn't heard it from me in many years, maybe 20, maybe more, I'm not sure. I would not have you to be ignorant, brethren, concerning them which are asleep, that you sorrow not, even as others which have no hope. For if we believe that Jesus died and he rose again, even so them also which sleep in Jesus will God bring with him. For this we say unto you by the word of the Lord, that we which are alive and remain unto the coming of the Lord shall not prevent them which are asleep. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, and the voice of an archangel, and with the trump of God, and the dead in Christ will rise first. Then we which are alive and remain shall be caught up. That word caught up in Greek is the word force. It's exactly the same word Jesus used in Matthew 11, the violent take it by force. Now, if I said over in Matthew 11, if I use that staying consistent with a word, and I use that same exact word over in, let's see if Dave does that. In Matthew 11, if I said, and the violent shall take it by harmatizo. That's the Greek word, harmatizo, which means force. That's what the word means. To seize, to force something. If I did that and I come over here in this same passage and I'm staying consistent with that word, because if that's what that word means, that's what that word means. And I read it over here the same way, and I said, then we which are alive and remain shall be seized or forced. Now, that's where they get the word rapture. It's not in the Bible. Y'all know that, right? Just about anybody that's half of a student knows that rapture is not in the Bible. But yet you can talk to probably 80 or 90% of fundamentalist Christians, and they think the rapture is in the Bible and that you can't take away their rapture. I mean, it's just not any way can you do that. Right, Steve?
That's why I
that causes war, and that will show you the strong arm of the force of the church in a hurry. And it ain't got nothing to do with God. It ain't God, matter of fact, period. It's not. It is religion and politics. And it shows you how that we're going to keep what we got by force, we're going to keep it by force. They'll force you out of the church.
Yeah, they were,
Right.
they were working on it.
That's where
we questioned the rapture, and they started having deacons.
But you know, to me, the foolishness of the argument is very, very clear right here. If you're going to use the word harmatizo, and that word harmatizo means to seize something or to force, to violently force something in place, like Jesus used it, or like it's used in the Gospel of Matthew, and in a couple of other places too. If you stayed consistent with it, there's not any way that you would even sell an idea that we're talking about people being lifted up in the sky and defying gravity and just floating away and going somewhere, flying away on a horse. So we have come to a place that I feel in the movement of what God is doing and what God is saying, that we are beginning to awaken to the greater truths that are always before us, always hidden right here in this, so that we can be the greater person that we are designed to be. So that I can be the greater me that I've always been designed to be, and that I can live. I was listening to a fellow, and he said the first 40 or 50 years of his life was just filled with nothing but failure, failure, failure. But in the eyes of the world, he was successful because he was able to make a lot of money. That he had 4 or 5 failed marriages, And he just went on and on and on, and then he said he finally realized what he had was a spiritual epiphany. He didn't even believe in God. He certainly didn't believe in Jesus. He certainly didn't believe in any religion at all. And he come to a place that he had an epiphany, and he realized that God is spirit, and that spirit is all potentiality, and that spirit can work in him and make the greater part of him manifest. And that happened for him. And it changed his whole world. And he's what, in his 50s or maybe 60s, four failed marriages, and now he's living the life of his life. He's living. Do you understand that takes courage to do that? Because in religion and in tradition, you ain't going to do that. You can't do that. Why? You're stepping outside the perimeter of their boundaries. And that's what I see happening. We have to bring the boundaries, the walls down, so that we can allow people to be, but not just allow people to be, allow yourself to be. Allow yourself to be all that God has made you to be, instead of just binding yourself down with rules and regulations and do's and don'ts and da-da-da-da-da, etc., etc. Okay, I'm going to quit right there.